So I want to talk about going the VESC route and is it the right choice for you? So this is for anyone, whether you know anything about VESC or not. I'll just give you a brief introduction of what it is and what the fuss is all about. And then I will tell you what the options are now in the summer of 2024. So we'll take a look at how you go about getting into riding a VESC board. What is VESC? VESC stands for Vetter Electronic Speed Controller, which is basically a controller for brushless motors invented by Benjamin Vetter. And this has been around for many, many years. I don't know, 6 or 7 or so. And then about 5 years ago, Mitch Lustig added support for balance vehicles. So Onewheels, EUCs, whatnot, anything that is on a single wheel and balances, or doesn't even have to be a single wheel. But that basically made the VESC firmware capable of handling a balanced vehicle like a one wheel. So VESC doesn't really know anything about the application. It could be an electric skateboard, an e-bike, a go-kart, a submarine, whatever, anything that has a brushless motor in it, basically. But yeah, with Mitch's addition of the balance logic, we had the ability to make one wheels. Then a bunch of other people started also contributing, and now the code has been better and better. When I first started 4 years ago, the VESC boards were probably on par with like a trotter. Like they were pretty horrible in terms of ride feel. And then about a year later, it started getting pretty good, but still couldn't even keep up with an XR. And about 2 years ago, it was on par with Future Motion. Shortly thereafter, it kind of surpassed it because you took the ride feel that matched Future Motion, but you added more powerful controllers, more powerful motors, and suddenly the options were there to build some pretty insane vehicles. So what makes VESC so good? First, the most noticeable thing is you will have more torque. Pretty much any VESC conversion has a noticeable increase in torque because for whatever reason, Future Motion is limiting their controllers. They're providing lower amps than what we do, and amps basically translate directly to torque. Now, speed is a different story. Speed, you can have higher speed with VESC if you put a higher voltage battery. If you put a VESC into a board and you don't change the battery, don't expect the speed to go up. But with a higher voltage battery, you can run much higher speeds. It's basically linear, so whatever your voltage is, speed goes up proportionally with it. And then there's also a safety factor. For probably 2-3 years, VESC boards have actually been safer than Future Motion boards. The way they are built, if they're built right, let's ignore the part where you build a shitty VESC board and have shutdowns due to that. In general, the behavior of VESCs in extreme situations and if things go wrong is actually more rider safety oriented than the Future Motion board. If you want some examples of that, so low voltage behavior is a classic example. It's pretty much known that GTs and XRs and Pints, they're not very safe to ride at 20-30% battery, whereas VESC boards don't really have that issue. You still have the full torque available, and you also have the ability to set your voltage limit yourself so that you get notified on time instead of prioritizing the advertised range that they give you. So they let you ride the battery down to some crazy low levels. And there's other examples that are safety related, but I don't want to go into that. And then the other thing is you can have a lot more range with VESC boards, depending on how you build and what kind of board you build. But in general, you just have a lot more flexibility. So you can build a light board, you can build a long range board, you can build a super fast board, you can build a board with mega tires, like the 8-inch Spurs tires. Yeah, pretty much the options are endless. Then you have the ability to connect remotes. It's not really my thing, but a lot of people love that about VESC. Now, to be fair, VESC does have its downsides. It's definitely more difficult to tune your VESC, to troubleshoot it, and so on. Of course, if you have an actual problem and something breaks, it tends to be easier to get it fixed and troubleshoot it because all the data is public, it's not hidden. So that part is actually an advantage, that if you do have a hardware problem, if something breaks, then it's much easier to get it repaired. And then also there's an overwhelming amount of configuration options. And for some people, it's just, they just don't enjoy it. They struggle with it and they get overwhelmed and they just want to ride and not worry about things. And VESC doesn't really give you that. And so you got to think about it, if that's something you want to get into, and if any of these big advantages that exist, if they are really important to you, then you're probably going to be okay with that learning curve and getting up to speed on how all that works. But yeah, I've seen people give up on it, and it's just not everyone's cup of tea. So what are your options for going VESC? Let's say you really want one, you've already been, you're already convinced that you want to go that route. So how do you do it? I'm going to list the options ordered by ease of use. And some of you may not like the top option, but if you order it by ease of use, here is the easiest one. Yeah, so it's a Gosmilo. It's the only VESC board you can just order off Amazon and it arrives fully assembled. You can just turn it on and ride away. Unfortunately, it's still a shitty board because it's a trotter. It's literally a trotter that now has a VESC controller. And so you have the VESC behavior, but you still have a shitty motor, pretty weird foot sensors, and it's not really a great board. So yeah, it's not really a serious option. So now your best option is to go with a complete build. And there are several shops around the US and some abroad that give you the full, basically, build service. They build a board for you and they also tune it and essentially make it ready to ride. And yeah, they're not selling products, they're just basically selling the service. But in the end of the day, you get to pick up a board that you can just hop on and ride, and you don't have to deal with configuration and IMU calibration and all that stuff. And yeah, so one that really stands out to me is Atlo Shop. They have been super active in the community, and they were actively trying to make sure that they understand how the boards work, how to make them better, how to fix all the common issues. And some of the others also are active in the community. But yeah, Atlo definitely stands out. Hello. And yeah, so other shops, I'm going to put them all up on the screen. But yeah, other shops would be Miami Board Shop, Magic PV, and PV dispensary and float therapy. There's actually a complete list on pev.dev. Oh, also, I don't want to forget Mario and his board garage in New York. Um, I know that he is one of the experts in the VESC community. He's been around for a long time. He's been building e-skates and so on. So he really knows a lot of the history and understands how a lot of things work. Yeah, but there's a complete list on pv.dev. So just go on there and search for service and you will find a list of those shops. So the pros of a full service build in general are you get to use top of the line parts and you get to pick and choose how you want your board to be. And you have a local guy with warranty and whatnot. And so you have somebody at least to talk to, help you troubleshoot, even if they may not know how to configure all the VESC stuff. The cons are obviously the price. You got to basically be willing to spend GTS level money to get one made. There are cheaper ones too, but I think you're basically looking at GT to GTS plus price levels to get a board done. They might also do conversions for you, so there might be cheaper options, but yeah, it's obviously more expensive than if you do it yourself. Right? Now, the next one's the Floatwheel. Floatwheel has a great motor. It comes almost pre-assembled. It has a pretty decent controller, and that will be even better now when the V2 comes out. Out of the box, you get great speed and range. You basically have 20% more range than a stock GT. The assembly is pretty easy. And also, Tony has proven to be really good in terms of hardware support. So if anything breaks, Tony's really responsive and sends out replacement parts pretty generously. And then, you know, one thing that's really unbeatable with the Floatwheel is the price. I mean, the value for money is really good. Now, the cons is there is literally zero configuration support. The whole business model relies on the community doing the support, which is kind of annoying because the amount of customers that he has, yeah, it's a little frustrating to see, you know, how many are struggling and looking at other customers to help them with the configuration. The biggest downside of the Floatwheel is probably that you don't have the option to use many aftermarket parts, and there is not really a lot in development. There is a couple guys that are 3D printing stuff, and a few things are being made for it, but mostly all your spare parts come from Floatwheel, and yeah, you're like locked into the rails. You don't have the ability to order parts from Float Life and, you know, customize your board too much. And then the other thing worth noting is that the BMS solution is pretty sketchy in the first version of the Floatwheel. A lot of people have gotten dumped at low battery because the BMS cuts off, which is very atypical for VESC because we normally make it so that the BMS doesn't even have the option to cut your power. So it never happens except with the Floatwheel. So that's something to keep in mind. I mean, maybe, I don't know, 5 or 10%, I'm making this number up now, but 5 or 10% of riders, it seems, have had that issue, me included. I've had it cut off on me, actually the first version that I had. Yeah, I've had it cut off on me a couple of times in the beginning, and then Tony sent me like a whole new replacement battery for it because apparently the BMS was broken. Oh, and the other thing is the bearings. They are actually, even though they're supposedly NSK bearings, it looks like they might be fakes that Tony has received, or at least some of them, because you just have to spit at them, and if they just get any water, they start making noise and they're rusting. So I don't think that those bearings are actually genuine. and SK bearings. And then the problem is they're not easy to replace and they're not cheap. So if you buy actual SKFs or whatever of that size, you'll spend almost $200, and then you have the replacement, which is also not cheap, right? So now next is the Funwheel. So that's Fungineers selling a kit, and now he pretty much also has almost an entire board. You still need bumpers, so most people just get bang bumpers from Float Life. But other than that, you can get pretty much everything: motor, rails, controller, battery, foot pads, and so on. Pros there are you get an excellent motor, pretty much the best motor out there. You get also a very, very good controller with the Thor, and in general, the build quality of most of the parts is actually really good. Like the controller box seems really good. He has some QA issues, so that's not, it's not always been ideal. But in general, those parts are pretty high end and you get pretty good value for money. The battery, it's a 20S2P of 18650 cells, so it's not a long range battery, but it's very competitively priced because it's complete with BMS and everything. The BMS isn't the greatest, and the charger that you can buy with it isn't really that great, but for the money that you pay, it's still a really good option. And probably the best thing about the Fungineers, the Funwheel, is its XR system compatibility. So you can use any spare part, any XR rail, and footpad, any bumper, whatever you want, flight fins, all of those parts are compatible. And so that makes it easy to really customize your board. And you can also get third-party batteries from different vendors and turn that board into like a, so now we're going more into the DIY route, but still it's these options exist, so you don't have to buy the whole thing. You can just pick and choose what you want from him. Now the downsides, similar to Floatwheel and kind of almost worse, is the configuration support. It's just downright non-existent, and it's sometimes infuriating watching the Discord where people ask the same questions over and over again. Fungineers spends zero time improving his Discord or pinning messages and helping customers. He basically waits for somebody. He's just hoping that somebody will come from the community and help, and then sometimes customers get desperate and email Fungineers, and he doesn't respond for like several days, and only after repeated emails and threats and so on, and then he will maybe help them. But I mean, this is just not a scalable solution. This worked when you had 10 or 20 customers, but with hundreds of customers, Fungineers needs to really step up his game on configuration support. Now, the other downsides of the Funwheel are I already mentioned the BMS, but then also the foot pads. They're not really ready for prime time. Seems like they still have issues, the Stompies. And then the lights, I mean, it's nice that they're included and they're nice and fancy, but they're not really lights that you can ride with at night. They're not super bright. There are third-party options, but the stock lights that come with the Funwheel, they're just good enough to sort of, to be seen, but not to illuminate the road in front of you. I don't think they even have XR level brightness. And then the next thing is the conversion kits. There are several options available. When it comes to conversion kits, there is first and foremost the GTV kit that now I think there's hundreds of them out there. And I'm actually riding a GT right now that has been converted. And so those kits allow you to do a solder-free conversion, so you don't need to be a super DIY-minded person. if you can take your controller, or if you can take your board apart and undo some screws and follow instructions, then you'll be able to do this. And that really opens up the possibilities for VESC conversions to pretty much anyone. You still have to deal with configuration and such, but especially here with the GTV, it seemed to already work out of the box with the configuration it came shipped with. So with the GTV, you get a pretty good controller that mounts on a heatsink. You get a replacement BMS that, unlike in the Floatwheel, it cannot cut power on you, which is how it should be. It's basically a charge-only BMS. Now, one of the issues that you will run into with the GTV is you will very quickly overheat your motor, because the controller lets you put out more amps, so you do get more torque, but if you use it for too long, then the motor gets hot really quick. Luckily, unlike with a Future Motion board, the temperature is no secret. It is constantly being monitored and reported to you, and you're being alerted well ahead of hitting danger territory. So it's really easy to keep your motor in a safe temperature range, and the chances of actually overheating it and getting your magnets to demagnetize or the epoxy to melt is practically near zero, unless you intentionally turn those warnings off. Yeah, so that's the GTV. Then another option is the GTFO kit from Fungineers. I think he saw what Tony was doing with the GTV and he wanted to jump on the bandwagon. And he does offer a different approach, because if you want to just plug it in, if you want to go cheap, then the GTV kit is the easiest way. But if you want to also solve your motor overheating problems, then the GTFO kit from Fungineers is actually the easiest way, because it basically guides you in the direction of reusing the superflux motor. So you need the superflux connector, and that way, for, I don't know, it's like maybe a total of $900 or $1,000, you get the controller and the motor to basically truly upgrade your GTV, I mean your GT. Hi. And that then gives you a truly superior board that does not overheat, because the Thor controller never overheats, and the Superflux is probably the motor that's the hardest to overheat out there. So it's a trail monster without too much effort, no soldering. So you can all do it yourself at home. And then there's AvaSpark. They make some pretty nice kits that seem pretty complete and fairly easy to install. Mostly they're U-Box based, I think. And then there's Makerspev, but I'm not sure what happened to them. They used to be the pioneers at making conversion kits, but now they've come out with the Little Fokker V4, but I don't believe they have a new conversion kit yet, so you pretty much can only buy the controller, so they just fall into the DIY category at the moment. And yeah, and then there is a DIY category, but that is a whole other video in itself. I could go on for 30 minutes or more just talking about your DIY options, and yeah, controllers, motors, batteries, and boxes, and all that stuff. So that'll be another video. So yeah, guys, so those are your options. If you want to put together a board without doing any soldering, or if you don't want to do any of that work, you just want to write off, then yeah, that's the options that I covered here. All right, that's it. See you guys next time.